So I took this book out from the library the other day called Misbelief: What Makes Rational People Believe Irrational Things by Dan Ariely. And in the book, it talks a lot about how people believed, irrational conspiracy theories during the COVID-19 pandemic. And, one thing that I realize is a lot of the books in our libraries kind of support that mainstream narrative on the pandemic. At the height of the pandemic, had you said, you questioned masks, you questioned social distancing policies, you questioned why parks were getting shut down, you'd be laughed out of the room. You'd be dismissed outright. And only now, 4 years later, are people starting to realize that this was not really based in evidence, and they were mandated. And I truly believe anything that's mandated by government should rest in some way on sound evidence. And the fact that it wasn't, it naturally lends itself to people questioning government action. I mean, it just naturally does. But what's interesting is public library books that are, on the shelves, that are being promoted on audiobooks, that are, easy to access, seem to reinforce that kind of mainstream narrative, if that makes sense. And Dan Ariely's book is no different, although, later on in the book he talks about stress, that leading to why we believe some irrational things, but just the framing of it. The idea that we can't question government when it comes to these, the pandemic and what the government did, lends itself to literally the erosion of our democracy and our government. If you start telling people that questioning government mandates is in fact conspiratorial, is in fact, wrong, and you were wrong for doing that, well, what do you think that individual does? It's already a stressful situation when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. What is that individual going to do? They're certainly not going to believe government mandates. They may even be less likely to agree to adhering to those mandates, but also that erosion of trust in elected officials starts. And it starts splintering our society down to people who 100% believe what the government tells them and those that don't. And what's really interesting is that when this happens, those that 100% believe the government, something might happen. Right? So they might have done all the social distancing. They might have gotten as many COVID shots as possible, wore masks, and they might have still gotten COVID. They might have gotten COVID multiple times. And suddenly they start thinking to themselves, wow, well, the people who were once questioning government aren't as radical as they might be seen. In fact, they might actually have a legitimate point. And I think, to be honest, there is a real reason why governments don't want us questioning things, right? Because it just adds governments to do more work on justifying their decisions. And I don't believe a lot of the decisions during the pandemic were based on legitimate science. And when I read Dan Ariely's Misbelief: What Makes Rational People Believe Irrational Things, the arrogance that comes through the pages when it comes to, dismissing people who had legitimate concerns furthers that gulf, that separation in our society. And I think that's a real concern that we should have. The fact that these authors are pursuing and putting forward ideas that, in my opinion, go against critical thinking. They go against the ability for any one of us to go out there and question what our governments are doing, to kind of say, well, you're kind of ridiculous for questioning government, I think is absolutely abhorrent. It goes against the fundamental principles of democracy. But more than that, it undermines the constitutional privileges and principles that the United States fought for, including freedom of thought and belief. And it lends itself towards a a genuflection before government, a kneeling before government to say, we are too stupid to know what's best for us. Government, oh government, please, we are in your hands. And I think that for a healthy, thriving democracy, we need a healthy, thriving civil society. And a healthy, thriving civil society needs to question government action. It always needs to do that. And it doesn't matter if it's left or right, it needs to always question government action. And the reason why it's necessary is because we need informed citizens to put forward ideas to government so that government can actually implement policy that's informative. But if government acts unilaterally and we have members of civil society who agree with government action and those members write books that our public libraries promote, and of course we have mainstream media promoting it, it doesn't take much for people to start questioning why governments are doing what they're doing and lending themselves to conspiratorial, if we'd like to say that, ideas. So what makes rational people believe irrational things, Dan Ariely, I think, is a willingness to turn away from critical thinking during a very stressful time, creating narratives that are very simplistic, and doing away with anyone's questioning or critiquing of those same policies.